New England-based church planter and pastor Justin Kendrick says something's amiss in the Christian community: real connection. Kendrick has observed that in this world, loneliness is the norm. Rich friendships are rare, and the church is no exception. He believes that can change. In The Sacred Us, Kendrick unpacks 7 principles which will guide us from isolation to a life rooted in friendship and connection.
All right, Justin joins us now. It's a great book. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
One thing that struck me right away, and I talked about it with the producer yesterday, how you mentioned we've never been so accessible to people.
That's right.
Ever. Yet we're so disconnected and isolated at the same time. How did that come about?
Yeah, there's a long history, right? And we find in our day today, sociologists are calling it the new leprosy, that people are so isolated that loneliness is at exponential rates. And I think there's a lot of things that have played into that, but I think one of the central elements is this emphasis on autonomy and individuality that we love in America, which has a lot of great benefits, but also lends us to see ourselves apart from others in a way that's really unbiblical. So when you look at the New Testament accounts and you look at Jesus even giving the Sermon on the Mount, a lot of Christians don't realize, especially Western Christians, that everything in that is plural, right? So we are the light of the world. It's not an individual call, but a collective call.
And didn't COVID, I mean, we're out of it now, so to speak, but didn't COVID kind of give us all permission to get into a lifestyle and a habit of, I'm not accessible, I can't go to that event, I'm not participating in this, and then it's hard to kind of step back into it for people.
Yeah, I think COVID perpetuated the problem. It's been going on for generations in America, but I also think that COVID unmasked how difficult and how toxic this is. And I'm seeing more and more Christians especially realize, hey, I can't stay in my little isolated bubble, listening to my worship songs and my podcasts. I need relationships. Something's missing in my faith.
They're finding they need it. It's not just a want.
Yeah, I think that when you understand God biblically, you understand him as Father, Son, and Spirit. So at the center of the universe is relationship. He's not a lonely deity, which means that relationship is essential to our faith. So I can't have a personal relationship with Jesus, but be unwilling to have a deep relationship with other Christians.
Well, I was also struck by that in your book. You talk about how we strive for a personal relationship with Jesus. I've never considered that maybe that's not what I should be striving for, I don't know if you're saying it's a negative, this personal relationship. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's a distortion, right? Certainly, God wants us to have intimate communion with him. There's no doubt about it. Our relationship with Jesus should be intimate, personal, unique. However, Jesus hides himself in my brother. And so if I'm going to know him fully, I have to know him through others. And so it's not just about me and Jesus being alone and having my faith. If you're going to be biblical, it has to be about me being connected to the body.
Well, you have a fascinating journey because you got to know people very well. So a couple decades ago, you really started living community in a way not many people have, including literally tearing down fences. Talk about that.
We did, yeah. So my wife and I decided early in our Christian walk that we wanted to stretch the bounds and let people into our lives. And so...
Was that a tough decision? I mean, that's uncommon. Let's let people into our lives.
You know, I was captivated by the book of Acts, and I realized, in that the only way to grow a community like that is to give people uncomfortable access. And so we ended up buying a multifamily house.
She was on board with that?
She was mostly on board with that, right? Yeah, so, but I mean, I think we've been married 18 years. We tried to do the math. I think 16 of the 18, we've had someone not biologically related to us living in our home. And so almost our entire adult lives, we've been sharing space and then also sharing proximity. So people moving close together and then like giving people what we call refrigerator rights, like you have the right to be in my space anytime. And there are dangers to that. And I talk about that in the book, that boundaries are essential. But until we open up, I don't think we're going to see the type of community the New Testament describes.
Yeah, I remember in your book, you said you would come home, you'd drive home, and there would be people in your backyard, in your home. I mean, that could be uncomfortable for everybody, right? But it really... A church grew from that.
Yeah, well, not in churches, So I think, New England is the least church region in the United States, so fewer people attend church, read the Bible, follow Jesus than anywhere else in America. And I think that it takes a radical commitment to one another to break into that region. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been fruitful.
So churches grew out of it, but what makes your church is different. I'm sure there are a lot of similarities to the traditional American church. What's different about it?
Yeah, so I'm not against the systems we have, right? So we meet on Sundays, we have small groups, all that's wonderful. But underneath those things, the 7 principles outlined in my book are essential to spiritual life at our church. And what that means is we're being intentional to develop relationships that don't just fit into a system, but actually become central in our lives. And so a lot of Christians say, yeah, I love church, but it's peripheral in my life. You know, it's not central. We try to teach people that followers of Jesus need to build community around their lives as a central piece.
Isn't it interesting, too, in a lot of churches, we don't want to be asked how we are. We don't want people to really inquire about it. But we do at the same time, you know?
Yeah, vulnerability, I compare it to when I was a kid and I used to like to jump off bridges into water, right? Everybody likes to do it, nobody likes to go first, right? Because it's like, how deep is that water? I don't know, you know? But it's a thrill. But vulnerability is the same way. I want to be vulnerable, I just don't want to go first. And so, you know, it takes courage for Christians to realize that confession of sin and honest transparency actually brings healing.
Well, you're not just talking the talk, because in your book you talk about you have men in your life that you are 100%. Vulnerable with. They're older, I think they're mentors, but you say they know your secrets. You put it out there.
They know every detail of my life.
Why do you do that?
Yeah, I do it because we're living in a time where church leaders are often 2 people. And really can't be trusted. And so for me, as our church grew and expanded, I realized I don't want to have any parts of my life that are a secret.
So many mental health problems right now in culture. How can this community approach to living change that? Can it change it?
Yeah, I think 100% it can. You know, I think a lot of the mental health issues that we have stem from our isolation. You know, when Jesus sent out his disciples to preach the gospel, he did it 2 by 2. And he did that because everybody gets a little weird when you're alone too much. And so when people are not going to work, they're sitting in front of their computer, they're not connecting with friends. Most people don't even have a close friend. The isolation compounds and unhealthy things start to grow.
So what's some of the greatest fruit you've seen, even from people in your church, your friends, from vulnerability, believing more in community?
Yeah. One example that comes to mind right away, a couple years ago, I met a guy at our church who he had just actually tried to commit suicide. And God had literally intervened and saved his life. And he was estranged from his wife and his 2 kids. I talked to him about Christ, shared the gospel with him. He opened his life to Jesus, and we began to meet regularly, talk about Christ. Pretty soon, his marriage was restored. He joined my community group. He's one of our closest friends, and now his kids and my kids are growing up together, and we're watching how the gospel can actually change people through community.
And that was a life that was almost ended.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So intentionality, if church leaders are watching, just Christ followers are watching, and they're a little afraid to be vulnerable. It's my last question here. What's a good first step, a good first approach? Yeah, so in the Sacred Us, I outline 7 principles, and they are sequential. So the first principle is that proximity provides opportunity, which simply means you've got to rearrange your life to make space, and that really shows some of the idolatry in our nation and in our culture, because I'm busy. And I want to keep control of my calendar. But deep relationship just doesn't happen unless you give it space. I know I said that was the last question, but one other thing, you talked about managing our egos. We become kind of pros at managing our ego. Sometimes we just don't want people to see the real us. So we need to take the courage and just say, here's who I am. Yeah, you know, James talks about how when we confess our sins one to another, we're healed. And I think a lot of Christians, we're forgiven by God, but we're healed through confession to another. And I think a lot of Christians are walking around wounded because they have no one that they honestly confess to. Yeah. Great stuff. I think people can tell I really like the book. It is called The Sacred Us, and you can buy it anywhere. I really encourage you to get it. Justin, really appreciate you being with us today, man. Thanks for having me. Thanks so much. Great stuff. All the best to your churches and your family.
Hello, I'm Gordon Robertson. Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more encouraging videos like this one. Welcome to the 700 Club Interactive family, and God bless you.